I have kind of got my ducks in a row, or whatever you want to say, and I have really got a schedule of workshops planned now for the opening of the year. Um,
That's
and I'm
exciting.
going to be walking through what I'm calling the four postures of love. And you two may have heard me speak before about kindness, connection, curiosity, and play. And I used to refer to these as the four postures of transformational learning. So they're the same thing. Now I call it love. And I kind of said, oh, that's interesting. Is one definition of love transformational learning? And I thought, yeah, maybe. But it's also just an evolution of my thinking. But I think if we had just one word to answer Daniel's never ending riddle about what the hell do we do about global pluralism, it would probably be the word love, right? And so I'd love to, get into a little bit what those four postures are, because the workshops obviously draw on my background in the Feldenkrais method and body awareness and working with the body and regulating the nervous system. But it's also about emotion. It's also about interpersonal relationship. It's also about the voice in my head and how I deal with it. And it's also about the fact that, sure, when people come to the workshop, which is hosted on Zoom, they'll be in their homes and we can do nice things that we do in workshops where we take the time. But the next day, they might be dealing with snow and their neighbors and, maybe even federal troops in their backyard. So how do we do love under those circumstances? And so anyway, I'm excited about this. I'm teaching a workshop called the Four Postures of Love, which will happen every month. So people have recurring opportunity to do that. And then last month, I taught the Relentless Kindness workshop. So we all know it's good to be kind, but then we all notice the times that we forget to be kind. So the concept there is like actually have to be relentless about being kind. This month, I will be teaching the Courageous Connection workshop. So I'm just giving you the sort of the thumbnail sketches of each one, but connection, or people use the word presence or attention, I would say is fundamentally about turning towards your life or turning towards the situation. But as we often talk about, there's so many reasons I'm tempted to turn away and not look at things or not hear what certain people are saying, right? And so there's capacities like what we train in meditation, staying with my breath. But of course, sometimes I wander away from my breath. And that's also natural, that my attention will just ping around. But then there's, so there's the aspect that's like let's say skill training. Can I just improve my capacity for attention? But then there's also, do I have the will to attend to something, right? Am I willing to watch? Am I willing to listen to this person's story? Or am I willing to, have this difficult conversation? So then in the following, in March and April, I'll be doing the Infinite Curiosity workshop. And then kind of with a little nod to John Vervaeke, I'll be doing the Serious Play workshop in April. And so the curiosity, the point on curiosity is that if we are attending, if we are paying attention, like if, play along at home, look into Aspasia's Zoom square and what do you notice? And just keep looking and keep looking. And what's that red thing behind her? And, like what? Look at the pillows. And then you start, and does she get self-conscious the more I talk about it?
Yes.
And all of this.
Yes.
But the more you pay attention to whatever you pay attention to, the more detail comes forward. And then at a certain point, the question gets posed like, how much is there? And you realize, oh, it's infinite. I could, what I don't know is infinitely larger than what I do know. So if I'm, again, in relationship, if I'm with this person who has the opposite, supports the opposite political candidate as who I am, can I be curious? Can I ask them why they support that person, or where did they grow up, or, what were the formative experiences when they were coming into adulthood that might have shaped them? And so that's all about curiosity. And then play, of course, if we think of the snow, the way the kids respond to the snow is very different. They actually see the opportunity, they get out their sleds, they make snowmen and throw snowballs. but play is also, to me, if I'm trying to work through an issue, you know, when I've done the kindness towards myself, when I've paid attention, when I've got curious, there's still a moment like, well, are you going to do something? Right. So play is actually diving into the water or whatever metaphor you want, but it's actual engagement. And when I'm engaged, you know, I don't know how this is going to turn out. I just know that I'm going to jump off the diving board now. And I'm only going to find out what it's like to be underwater by going, right? But then of course things can go good or not go so good, but it's like the commitment to be in the game. And the improvisational you know, theater groups and whatnot have this phrase, yes, and, where I say, okay, whatever the other person on stage said, I'm just going to fully accept it. I'm not going to, you know, if the other improviser says it's raining, I'm not going to say, no, it's not. It's sunny, because then I just, you know, I'm messing up the evolving story. But I can, you know, make a joke about umbrellas or not having an umbrella, and I can play with it. I can develop my character however I want, but the other person already said that it's raining, so I just go with that. So if we take all of those skills, again, kindness, connection, curiosity, and play, that could be 4 different aspects of, again, how I relate to my inner voice. It could be 4 different aspects of how I relate to Aspasia when I meet her for lunch. It could be 4 different aspects of how I deal with emotions when they come up. You know, I'm angry, but is it okay to be angry, or do I actually have to slap myself on the wrist because I'm not supposed to be an angry person, you know, which would be a form of unkindness towards my emotion. So anyway, I'm excited. I've been developing these ideas for a number of years, but just sort of laying them out. And you know, these conversations with the two of you have actually been so helpful in developing this framework, just because it really, to me, I mean, if I was marketing in a different way, I would say how to deal with the girdle point. It's 4 postures of love, right? And I guess lastly, moving from transformational learning to love, I mean, I think for me has been a reframing of like, yes, okay, this is kind of about personal development, but no, actually, it is really about how do we deal with difference? How do we deal with others? And that's where I think love is more appropriate, because, you know, as much as like I'm determined to be patient, when I'm actually feeling like I'm lovable and I actually know that I love you, I tend to be more capable of being patient, right? So, and then vice versa. I mean, if I'm just in that state of love, I notice these 4 postures appear. But if I'm not really in that state of love and I'm trying to get there, then I can work with those 4 postures. So anyway, that's a big thing that I'm thinking about, writing about, and doing these workshops. And I'd love to throw that in, and I'd also love to know anything that the two of you are thinking about, and mix it all together in the soup.
So excited for you. So I really am so excited for that. Just this last for various reasons, and also probably some reasons I don't know yet, but I will figure out at some point. This last week I've been crying a lot. Um,
Mm,
and so I'm just yeah, I can feel the tears coming as you talk. So I may cry today, just letting you know. I actually cry a lot, but for some reason yeah, anyway. Um, yeah, I think the fact that I feel the tears coming as you talk
mm, mm,
is kind of enough. I'm so happy for you. I really am,
mm.
because
Yeah, well, thank you.
I can hear as you lay that out, I can hear everything that I always kind of already felt and knew about your approach to these things. And it
Mm,
just, I don't know, it just feels, it's beautifully packaged. The way you talk about it's beautifully packaged. I'm just really happy for you.
mm.
You got lots of, also have some things kind of related that I have been thinking about, but I might just give myself a second, Daniel, if you want to talk while I have a little cry, and then I can talk.
Absolutely. But I completely agree with you, Aspasia. That's wonderful, Seth. And everything you're describing there is just spot on. I guess a few things. So, like, basically, at the end of the day, the girdle point comes down to stuff like that. Like the Gödel point is basically the point where there's kind of forcing you to realize that thinking can't get you where you need to get. Like it's a space where you have to then enter human, like human, and the human is the bodied and all of those dispositions. Like we're not gonna like let me put it this way. The Gödel point is where you realize that the way forward cannot be to give it cannot be that everyone accepts the same position or that you give people the right answer, right? Like, for example, you mentioned Minnesota. It's not going to be where ICE convinces the protesters they're wrong or the protesters convince ICE that they're wrong. That's not going to be it. Because if you take seriously the Gödel point, whatever position you want to take, everyone in their map can fold the evidence into the internal consistency and choose indestructibility. And now we have violence and we're doomed, right? Like, so it's not going to be thinking. It's not going to be convincing people that they're wrong, right? Now that people may hear that and say, oh, so you're saying that nobody's right. No, that's not what we're saying. We are not saying there isn't right or wrong. What we are saying is that no one has to change if they don't want to. And basically the likelihood of people changing if all you're doing is meeting them intellectually is like zero, because they don't have to. They can always, I mean, we see with the videos that came out, people can look at the same video and not see the same thing. Well, if that applies to video, then when it comes to worldview and argument, it's like 5 times worse. So you can always spin things into the internal consistency, especially now after Gödel. And that's kind of the key move, is that Gödel actually makes maps indestructible, or Gödel creates a point that actually makes the human unavoidable, the subjective, the contradictory becoming, et cetera, so forth, right? So the problem of pluralism is ultimately going to have to be something of a higher geometry and dimensionality that's more human than it is just an answer, right? And it's just very interesting. So if we look to Plato, if we look to classic, where did they meet? They meet in a what? A gymnasium, right? There's a much more emphasis in the kids need to go to the military, they need training, wrestling, and so on and so forth. For a very, very long time, until I guess the Industrial Revolution, learning certain capacities, skills, postures, public speaking, orientate, like how to fight, even like jousting, like all of these things were considered part of education. So education was not simply having good ideas, right? To know the answers to the test. It was a full-bodied experience. We're simply returning to the age now where we're looking at global pluralism forces us to accept that an education program, if you will, that does not include something beyond information is not going to suffice, right? You're going to need capacities and abilities. And when you're talking about the ability to be relentlessly kind, the ability to have this courage, connection, curiosity, to hold the body, to control the nervous system, that's all kind of more reminiscent of a classical education going before the Industrial Revolution, where you would have to learn those kind of things. Can even when you get into etiquette or manners, like we may all think that's all silly, but the point is that stuff like etiquette was part of your education. The idea that horse riding was part of your education. And we kind of think that with extracurricular activities, but there's a kind of, the moment you call them extracurricular, there's a certain othering of it. It's not going to actually get you to a job. It's what you need to get into college. That's ultimately what it is. You need to do sports and all these other abilities, not because we believe they're inherently valuable, but it's what you need for a better college application to get you into college to get a well-paying job, right? We don't actually see these things as part of intellectual development, right? And basically with stuff like the Gödel point, like, yeah, it's going to actually come down to the ability to be relentlessly kind, the ability to be patient. I have a lot more to say, but like, again, there is something about how one holds themselves, literally holds themselves, that is now is part of the address. And so I much more to be said, but I really like what you were describing, Seth.
Yeah, I think in the absence, I couldn't agree more with all of that. There just really is a hole now in terms of where we are meant to learn these more complex, nuanced postures of all kinds. And when we spoke about philosophy last time, again, it's another one of those things. It's learning ways of being in friendship and slowing down in it. And but this, I think, given the gap, though, what happens is that Well, the way that most people now learn about love, it's not even explicit. So it's mostly implicit learning that becomes sort of procedural, if we want to call it that. It's kind of a cover word for making it like subconscious, or, we just do it. We just take part in it. We enact it over and over again in our life without understanding what we're doing and finding ourselves in these situations. But hold on, let me slow down. The way we learn about it now, obviously, is that we learn about it through our early relationships, and then, stacking on top of that subsequent relationships we have. We learn about love, and because no one's really talking about it explicitly, and especially once we come into adulthood, there is no real examination of it or how we take part in it, outside of just really cheap, flattened, ridiculous advice around dating and outside of that, and that's what love is kind of equated with too, is even just as a starting point. We talk about love and people think about like dating and sex, and that's really where their mind first goes. So even that is a starting point, broadening the base of what we're talking about when we talk about love. But people are because they're learning about it in that implicit way in early relationships, and it's never properly examined. I think what happens is in adulthood, for many people, love is associated with terror as well. So, love is associated with being, well, there's all sorts of reasons, but love is associated with being hurt. Love is associated with almost giving up on yourself or giving away your power, or, if I love someone, then they go away from me, then I lose something of myself, or it's kind of related to something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about for a while, but I've been thinking about in particular this last week for a few reasons that have all kind of come together at once, like the quality of missing someone, I just think that's another really nice example of the kinds of things that we've all been talking about, where it's an experience everyone has had. What we do, how we then how we can be with that experience internally, and therefore how we then make sense of it. Because I think if you go too quickly to try to make sense of it, that's a mistake. But allowing ourselves to be with the experience of it, and then how we make sense of it, is another one of these examples of how it can just be so different for different people and lead to either an opening up of oneself or a closing down, a shutting down. So you can, even just missing someone can be for a variety of reasons, right? And there's the situations where someone has died, and there's the situations where they haven't died, but they're no longer in your life. There's the situations where they are in your life, but they're just away for long periods of time. There's all sorts of missing, but in amongst all of that, you can miss someone from the posture of feeling anger and disdain and resentment towards them, that they're no longer there, or that, that you don't have access to them in that moment, all these things. But you can also miss them from a point of anger and disdain still, but then you turn it on yourself. That's because I'm not good enough. That's because no one will ever want to be with me. That's because I said the wrong thing once at dinner. They've got every license to not be around anymore. It's because I'm too needy. It's because I'm this. So that's kind of an inward anger, or the anger there. But then there's also, there's other possibilities too, but then I've also been thinking about how, on the other end of that kind of thing, there is, from the position of gratitude, that you are able to even experience this feeling. You could even experience this kind of connection, and a gratitude, again, that the person, if they're still alive, is alive, is out in the world, is someone that you love, is out there participating, doing, relating with other people, influencing other people, generating and being creative in the world. And even if you're missing someone who's passed away, that they were here, and the things that happened as a result. And that's much more a position of this kind of real opening up to the love and the gratitude that can flow from that. And at its best can be a form of comfort, actually. It's like a comforting kind of position. Even though, again, when I say these things, I don't want to ever imply that means it's supposed to blanket out all the other feelings that will still be there. It might still feel painful, and grief is still there. But grief is kind of what we're talking about, the way that we're with grief. And I mean, I always say this, I'm about to say the same thing I just said again now, because I think it's so important. I really don't want people to misunderstand that as me trying to do a positive spin on something. Like, it's not taking something and then kind of turning it into a story that just, you still feel it. Like, so the emotion, that's why the emotional level is so important, and building the capacity to be with all those very big feelings all at once is important. But then the next move from that, after that, from those feelings, is being able to be in a position of gratitude. I think it's that thing of, it helps you to open up to the kind of, what is it? More of that like broader connection, this idea, I guess, like we're kind of all connected, like it's just knowing that to love someone and know that they're out in the world, even if not with you anymore, or that they passed away, but they were in the world. Such a gratitude for their existence, such a gratitude for all of it, such a gratitude that paths were crossed, such a gratitude, and this is like, it's just such a beautiful kind of reverential thing. Again, still painful, still grief, still all these things. And amongst all that, in many scenarios, still important that you maybe reflect on, like, hold on, what's going on here? I'm not trying to say, is this a pattern here that, for whatever reason I meet people and then like they always leave, and, there is a place for reflection and all these things dependent on other goals or whatever, but just in a general sense, how we sit with missing someone, if everything else is kind of just, as is, I hope that makes sense. And I think that is probably part of what I was tearing up at too when you were talking, Seth, is on the one hand, just hearing you speak about something and seeing the way you were speaking about it, that I don't know if I'm right or not, but it felt to me like you're kind of excited, and like a moment's kind of arrived where it feels like, oh, I don't know, I just really felt for you in that. I know how hard you work and work on everything and on yourself, and how brave and courageous you are in that regard. And I just think that's really beautiful. And I'm so happy for you. And also, and amongst all that, there's the theme of love that you're talking about. And, it doesn't get enough attention. And it's really cheapened. The way we talk about love is just really cheapened in society and like flattened, and or it's a very it's a word that is almost it is given lots of attention in this grander sense by some groups of people, but it's in a very kind of dry, like, I guess it goes back to that philosophy thing. It's in a very dry kind of like theoretical sense. And just being able, like, love is more than an emotion. Love is the whole point of all of it. Like, I just think it's almost the fabric that holds us all. And it can encompass so much, and it never and it's infinite, and it's immense. I just, and my mind always goes to that classic expression too. I'm sure both of you may have heard this, where, like, for example, if you have one child, and often between a couple or just with yourself, you're debating if you're going to have another child, and people often think, oh, but I love this one so much, and I don't want to like give away my like, I don't want to like what's the word I'm looking for, like mitigate my love, but by having another one, like and everyone tells you, no, but your love will only grow, and kind of roll your eyes. But then, like, it's true, and it doesn't have to be a child. It could just be being able to have, multiple really close friends in your life or something. It's love only grows. It really doesn't. Once you properly experience it, and we can get through some of this fear that people carry around it, it's not at all about giving up a part of yourself. In fact, you grow. You actually broaden somehow, or become bigger as a result. And there's always more love to draw from somehow, and it's the only kind of substance, if we call it that I know of that's like that. And maybe that actually links to something then about the negentropy kind of thing here, because it's like it makes me think of that energy giving. It's the only, when that isn't, I will pass off. But there's quite a lot in that quality of missing thing that I didn't say there that I think is, we'll get to if it's natural, we'll get there.
Yeah, no, that would be good to explore further. I mean, first of all, I'm pretty sure someone listening will have felt this, but I could clearly feel when you shared what was moving through your body emotionally, how the tone just changed here on the Zoom call, right? And I started listening differently, right? I sat forward and I kind of like, adjusted, I don't know, my internal settings to be with you in that particular mode. And even that is another aspect. So when I did the workshop on relentless kindness, as I already said, one of the reasons I use the word relentless is, if you're kind on Monday, that's not good enough. You got to do it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You've got to do it morning, noon, and night, etc. But it's also, you have to do it all the levels. And when you were speaking, you said, hey, Seth, I noticed your excitement, right? Well, I didn't say, I mean, maybe I said I'm excited about the workshops, but you were talking about something that was different than the words I was saying, right? And it has to be relentless in the sense that I can have the intention to be kind to myself, but if I lack a certain attunement, I will be like, what's the word I want? I'll just have a lack of grace. So I will try to be kind to myself, but I will not be graceful, and I will still trip over my feet and maybe do something that has an unkind result, even though my intentions were kind. So it's like, yes, the intention is a very important part, but the attunement is another crucial aspect. And like a lot of times I sort of shorthand it by saying we have to do it with body, mind, heart, and soul. And soul kind of like is a reference to maybe a more spiritual way of thinking. But, the other thing I could say about, so I used the phrase originally, the 4 postures of transformational learning. And then I said, well, maybe that is kind of like what love is, because at the same time, there's also those situations that like the snow, or like something that would be like maybe a bigger event that we call a natural disaster, like an earthquake or something. There are unprecedented events. And even in the unprecedented events that no one could have predicted, we see people respond more and less gracefully. And again, I would say that something like love is part of what allows me to respond more gracefully, even when I have no clue what to do, because then what am I doing? I'm having to rely more on intuition. But what does intuition depend on? It depends on trust. It depends on, I don't know what to do, but something's telling me to do this, and I believe that that feeling means something. Or, I think all that, but you are looking me dead in the eyes and telling me that you believe something different, and I'm actually willing to stop what I'm feeling and look at what you're feeling. And, and this point you made about the second child, like, oh, come on, how could I? Love does do that thing, which it kind of has its own metaphysics. Right? It's like, or Daniel often talks about intrinsic motivation, or we talked about what happens when I come on this Zoom call and I'm kind of tired, and then we get talking and I have more energy at the end. How did that happen? I think that's something that love is doing as well. And I mean, honestly, from the very beginning, we started this whole series of conversations with this idea of authentic resonance. And I think, when you're in a state of love, that's when you're doing that. And then as I've become more interested in spiritual questions recently, I've mentioned, I have it right here, I've been reading A Course in Miracles, which is, we could get into maybe another time. I'm actually not qualified at this point because to compare it with the Bible, but the narrator of A Course in Miracles.
You don't have a certificate for that. You don't have
no certificates. No certificates, but good. Daniel will make me one.
He scrolled you one.
I just have to drive to Lynchburg to get it.
That's fine. Right,
which I'm going to do next week, so I'm very excited about
it. If the car works, you got to.
Yeah, but So what I was going to say though is that there is an inner listening that in the Christian tradition is called the Holy Spirit. At least from my beginner understanding, because I'm not, but there is this sense of like, how do you know what God is asking you to do? Because it doesn't always speak to you in English, right? But with more or less skill, if I believe that there is something more than me out there, if I believe that there is a wisdom that is beyond me, and if I'm willing to listen to it, even if I don't know how it works, I can do things, especially in unprecedented situations, based on thinking that there is something to listen for. Or I can just think, oh, that's all bunk and there's nothing to listen for. And then I'm just like, again, I'll respond intuitively or whatever, but I won't be able to develop anything like trust, with it. And I do think whether or not you want to invoke religion, spirituality, God, and all of that, again, we're in such unprecedented times that if you think that you're just going to calculate everything, if you think that you can make a plan that is going to be foolproof in all cases, it's just, no, it doesn't work. So, but, I find that if I'm kind, if I'm paying attention, if I'm willing to be curious about what I don't know, and if I'm willing to actually experiment or get in the game, those things will often make a big difference. And of course, if I define those, one way of talking about the four postures is as if they were sort of virtues, but then I can recognize the vices. Sometimes I'm harsh. Sometimes I'm disconnected. Sometimes I'm pretty bored or I'm judgmental. I mean, boredom is kind of a form of judgment. It's the judgment that there's nothing interesting going on here. Maybe if I paid more attention, I noticed there is something interesting going on here. Or if I'm too serious. I like to say a test of play is like, is this adult capable of meeting the energy of a child who runs into the room? Look at this picture I drew or whatever. But it's there's something else I'd like to get to, but actually I'm going to pass it on. But just to bookmark it, this. Oh yeah. So this is the other thing. I do want to pass it to Daniel, but just because you reminded me of it when what you were saying, Aspasia, is that also. So you were talking about to some degree like the vices and the virtues. Like I could handle this anger well, or I could handle it poorly. I could handle missing someone well, or I could not handle it so well, and we might call that skill. But there's also, let's say if we have a beautiful, beautiful love story, me and my partner or me in relation to my child, and I'm sort of doing everything right, it's still not the model for a beautiful love story with the next person who is a completely different personality. So this particularity, like, if I use religious language, because I've been thinking of it this way, like one sort of model is, can I see everyone as a child of God? But that is sometimes just, I think this is what Daniel's referring to with Bonhoeffer's cheap grace. I can say that. I can say this person is a child of God, but to really act as if they're a child of God, I have to actually say, who are you really? And what do you really think? And like I have to go into the particularity. So everyone's a child of God is a kind of a nice universalizing statement, but it's just a statement. To actually embody it, I'm going to have to deal with the particular. Anyway, there's a whole another thing around that I wanted to bring in, but I just wanted to make that general point anyway before I pass it on for now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm going to pass it to you, Daniel, but just on that point, that reminds me of there's a defense called vagueness that we use a lot in our work. When someone's being vague, you can be vague internally to yourself, or you can be vague as like a tactical defense. So you don't give someone too much of the specifics. You keep just being kind of more vague. The more vague you can be, the less connection there's going to be, right? And therefore the less emotions that get generated by feeling connected. And for some people that's what they're trying to avoid, obviously, because it brings up terrifying emotions to be connected. And so vagueness and particularity or specificity, as we kind of talk about it, is really, really interesting when you get into the details of it, because that is linked to all of this. I think that is linked to why we don't like to slow down, why we don't like to spend longer just really looking at one small example, because then we have to get more and more and more specific. You know, it punctures through all these automatic ways that we are all vague all the time, and there's times that we need to be vague. So I just think I really liked, I just really liked what you said there, and I think that's very true. That love plays out differently in all of these relationships, and that's what every relationship, even if we take love out of it too, every relationship calls for its own attunement and its own learning, and like a dance partner, like it really just, it calls for you can't just take a cheap, this is why all these, you can't just take a cheap set of rules and just apply it every time. Well, you can. I shouldn't say you can't. You can, but in terms of generating connection and the depth of love and possibility that's available there, then that won't work. Yeah, please, Daniel, over to you.
No, I think all of that is outstanding. There's a few things. First, it is odd that the word love seems to be the right answer. And it often, if you ask people what is love, it's difficult for them to say, right? This is very strange. Like, why is it that so many religions say God is love? We say, yeah, love is the answer. And even if we then immediately may get cynical and say, oh, it's not so simple, nevertheless, there is this initial moment of going, yeah, like there's this initial moment of going, somehow, yeah, that's that. Even if we may then question it or doubt it or say, well, love and ice, what, with Minnesota, what are we talking about? Like, love your enemies, that's insane. But there is nevertheless some almost just childlike tendency of the average person when they hear love to agree that it comes down to love. Even if they may disown it, there's nevertheless this first moment where, yes, that's it. But what is it, of course? There's always an interesting tendency where if you kind of go through and see similes of words, you can start to try to kind of isolate some sort of unique quality. So does love equal kindness, right? I think most people would say that love entails kindness, but is not reducible to kindness, right? Okay, so therefore love and kindness are not mere similes. There's an excess to love that needs to be explored, right? And in fact, there are times where people can be angry precisely because they love, right? So it can't be a simile for angry, right? Is love forgiveness, where you forgive someone, right? Well, it seems as if love entails forgiveness, but also it seems as if it's not merely forgiveness, because if I forgive you for doing something wrong, but then I'm looking at my phone the entire time you're at the dinner table, you don't feel much love because you don't feel attention or investment in you, right? So love entails forgiveness. It entails grace, but also seems to be something more than that, right? Okay, so is love attention? Well, if I'm giving you attention and I'm never taking my eyes off of you, maybe it's just obsession. Maybe it's controlling. Maybe my identity is too attached to you. Maybe it's lust or something, right? So love seems to entail attention, but also seems to be more than attention, right? We can continue down this route, right? There seems to be something about love is that it's some sort of unique coordination about all of those. Like it seems to be a coordination of many different things that opens up some sort of possibility, right? So it's a geometry, to use that language I like to use. Like it is not just an algebra. It's not like a single emotion. It seems to be some sort of way of being, musicality of being, if you will, that does something. What does it do? But what does it do? So, there's something obviously there's something about love that humanizes, right? Like when you're in the presence of love, it seems as if it is not possible to be a human being if you're not around love. Like it doesn't seem as if you can become a human being or form as a subject unless there's love, right? So there's something about love and creating humanity, like making personhood that seem to go together, right? And this is very interesting because what makes personhood then is fundamentally relational, right? It's not individual, right? So love seems to make us human beings, right? And so when we talk about love as the answer, there's some sort of creating humanization that is the answer. Like you could say one of the reasons why love, like let's look at Minnesota, right? What ends up happening in Minnesota is that people are not human beings to one another anymore, right? The protesters are stupid liberals, the ICE are fascist monsters, whatever, and people will hear that and take whatever side they want. But the point is that there's a certain sort of, they become more of a category than they become a human being, right? Now, the other problem is that when we say make them a human being, they may be saying, oh, so you're saying to agree with them. No, no, no. I think actually this is part of our problem is we're looking too much about who to agree with when really we should be business of before we ask who do we agree with, are we humanizing everyone in the situation? Actually, because it's almost as if before this is more and more what I've been thinking about, like this, we talked about it and we've been talking about it at the net. What does it mean to love your enemy? Okay. Because we hear that and we say, oh, it means to make your enemy not your enemy. That actually doesn't seem to be what it means. You love your enemy and they stay your enemy, and yet you love them as your enemy, right? So the phrase love your enemy, I think, is a mistake to assume means make your enemy your friend. It's almost as if when you are in conflict, humanize them. Like don't like as you fight them, like we were talking, why is there this ancient tradition of don't stab people in the back? Like if you fight someone, fight them face to face. That's kind of odd. Why not stab them in the back? Because it's as if it's almost as if there's a notion that when you fight someone, you must humanize them or else the cycles of violence will never end. Like the cycles of violence will never end. If you don't love your enemy, as you may kill them, like defeat them in war or battle, or like if you don't nevertheless humanize them in that conflict, the cycles of war will never end because there'll be a demon, there'll be an abstract category, right? And so the conflict will never end. So loving your enemy is possibly a humanization mechanism to stop the endless violence, to stop the endless war, to stop the endless conflict, right? So on the idea of love your enemy, instead of like focusing on convincing your enemy to be your friend or to make them realize they were wrong in their rage or whatever, because I think that's usually what we think of, there's almost a secret there where it's as if you actually can, if you can engage with your enemy in a humanizing process, there's something that makes the problem melt away. Not because you solved the problem. There's like this melting that occurs almost by magic, right? Rather you believe that or not, that seems to be the suggestion of love your enemy. It's that if you actually humanize the people around you, there's a melting that occurs, the melting of ice. That's exactly right, with the snow theme, right? So there's this kind of melting. Okay, so love does something that humanizes and melts it melts away the pain and the disagreement. And the argument you could make is basically the suggestion more and more. I'm like, there seems to be a suggestion that you can't even decide the right policy until you've met the condition first of humanizing everyone in the situation, right? That doesn't mean agreeing with, that means humanizing. Then once that is done, you can begin to actually think of the policy, right? And if you don't do that, then you just get endless violence or whatever. And basically what ends up happening is people go, well, we don't have time for that because it's immoral and monstrous and different things. Well, then the cycle of violence never ends. That's the problem. You get the Paul Virilio speed thing, right? And it just goes on. And more has to be said about that. But the point I'm getting at is that there is something about love and loving your enemy that creates a new dynamic of interaction that melts away the old. Okay, so what is love doing then? What is love doing? I've been more and more appreciating when Jane Zwiggy, and I'm more and more appreciating her in general. So thank you, Seth, for bringing her to my attention because she's freaking unbelievable. And her book, Experience of Meaning, and that's where you try. That's one of those books where you read 3 pages and you've like underlined every sentence, and you're like, this isn't helping me because it's
That's why I
just
gave up
underlying
on highlighters a long time ago.
You're just like, okay,
no.
okay, so I need to copy the book.
It's
Okay,
the part that's not highlighted that stands out. Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I'm like, what happened there, Jane?
You're looking for the lines to not underline so that they'll be like.
That's right.
That book, The Experience of Meaning. She's obviously defending Gestalt theory, and she wants us to understand that we always Gestalt. We get it, and then we calculate, right? So the examples he makes, and then I'll get to the point, is when you hear row, row, row your boat, and she's basing this on Christian, the original Gestalt theorist in the 1890s or whatever, the point she makes is You don't add up the notes and go, oh, that's row, 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 row your boat. You hear a tune and say, that's row, row, row your boat. You don't add up all of the notes. You don't say, oh, that's the frequency, this frequency, and you don't add the notes up to row, row, row. You just apprehend. There's row, row, row your boat, right? So likewise, when I look at that bookcase, I don't say, oh, wood. I don't gradually look at the parts and then say there's the whole. I apprehend there's a whole. And then here's her point. The parts come from analysis. It's not parts add up. It's the effect of parts versus wholes is from analysis. But in perception, there's only wholes. There's only gestalts, okay? And so and if there wasn't gestalts, which the key characteristic of a gestalt is that it's the way she describes it is getting it is the gestalt insight par excellence. And she uses that word insight. You just get it, right? And what she also points out, and this is extremely important, and it kind of alludes to the Godel stuff, is that Frege, when he's trying to define what is truth, at the end of the day, he basically says, yeah, you can't really define what is true. You just kind of know what that word means. And she's like, exactly. Like even the most analytic of all analytic philosophers, at the end of the day, have to rely on, you just kind of get what I mean. You just kind of get what I mean when I say this is true, right? Because I can't fundamentally define it anymore. So there may not be an assumption. You would argue that Frege is not making an assumption, but he nevertheless has to appeal to getting it that can't be brought into language, right? So her point is that all intelligibility ultimately relies on a quote unquote getting it, something that is fundamentally human. And I would say that's Godel point stuff. There's a fundamental human element, right? Blah, blah, blah. But so there's only Gestalt, right? And the other characteristic of Gestalt is basically when you yourself, so there's two moves here, okay? There is you apprehend by a Gestalt, all intelligibility relies on Gestalt, but then there's the experience of being in a Gestalt, okay? When you yourself enter a Gestalt, like the obvious example is like a jazz improvisation, and she makes this example. When you're in the jazz improv, there comes to be a point where the music feels like it's playing you more than you playing the music, right? Like it's almost as if the music plays you. That feeling is the feeling of being in a Gestalt. And it is something where the feel, and what she says is a Gestalt, the only way to understand it is interdependency, interrelation, right? Where everything is interrelating with everything else and it moves together like the birds, right? The swarm of birds that you see, where it's all moving, right? So the characteristic of a Gestalt is when you feel as if your actions are tied together with the actions of everyone else around you, and every move you make affects the moves they make, and the moves they make affect you, right? So this is when you're in a Gestalt. Love makes Gestalts. Like when you create love in a family, it's now a Gestalt. That's what you do, actually. And here's the key. So you ask this question: what's the difference between a Gestalt and an aggregate? An aggregate means just a collection of like marbles, because a collection of marbles in a bag is not a Gestalt. He makes this point. Like if I have a bunch of marbles in a bag, it's a Gestalt. Like each marble is apprehended as a Gestalt, but that's just an aggregation, a collection, right? So what's the difference between a collection and a Gestalt? That interrelation, right? Like that thing where when one moves, everything else moves, right? So love is the difference between a Gestalt and an aggregate, right? And when you have conflict, the problem is you have a collection, but not a Gestalt. So therefore, there could be conflict. It doesn't move together. It doesn't relate. It doesn't do anything, right? So when you bring love into a situation, when people have this sort of notion that love is going to make the difference, it's because they say we need to make a Gestalt. We're not moving together. Like our actions are not codependent upon one another. We're not moving as a unit, right? So when we're saying we need to love our enemies, what you're saying is we need to make a Gestalt with our enemies, right? We need to actually move together. Otherwise, because if we don't move together, of course, the conflict is only going to get worse by definition. Like it's only going to fight. But once we start moving together, then we can start to actually deal with the policy questions, right? So love makes a Gestalt. And so the other thing that seems to be the case is there's another problem here. I can't just will to love, right? I can't just say, well, I'm going to start loving now, right? Doesn't work that way. You have to do things like your class, like what you're teaching. Like if you don't learn the stuff you're teaching, that is precisely the conditions of possibility for love. I would also argue that authentic resonance seems to be in the direction of love. Like you're making decisions that make you capable of love, actually. And if you don't follow authentic resonance, you're not capable of love, and therefore you're not capable of creating gestalts. And if you can't create gestalts, you can't solve problems. You can't overcome situations, and you can't bring things together. You're going to be stuck with collections of people in a room. Because if you think about it, when you walk into a room and it's not a gestalt, it's just a collection of people in a space. It's like the marbles in the bag. They're just in a room together, right? So there's a bunch of people in the room. So how do I take a bunch of people in a room and turn them from a collection of people in a collection of people to a gestalt? Has to be love. Love is what turns it into an interrelating whole, and it's now a gestalt, right? But you can't love just because you want to. You have to be able to speak in a manner that then makes that person feel the love and they love back. That means you have to be patient. You have to be curious. You have to be interested, right? And also, too, in order for you to actually be in that place where you can do that, you will have needed to have followed your authentic resonance and to have done the things of authentic resonance precisely so that you can be in the place to create the field that generates a gestalt. So basically, what we're increasingly seeing is that so what is global pluralism? It's a collection of diversity. What is a collection of diversity? An aggregate. It's a collection of difference, right? So the address of global pluralism has to be the ability to turn an aggregation into a gestalt. It has to be the ability to take difference and bring it into a gestalt, something that moves together and that works together. Love is what does that. But again, the issue, and then I'll close, is that we can't just will to love because we snap our fingers. If we say all the world is, I haven't met a single person that doesn't want to love. I haven't met a single person that's like, I am intentionally not going to learn to love, or I think love is bad. The problem is most people in most people's life, because they haven't learned how to create, dare I say, the field of love that generates the gestalt. Love just means duty. They say, I love these people because I have a duty to them. I've sacrificed for them. I've done a job I hated to pay for their bills. That's what they mean by love. And they mean I have a certain interconnectivity with them because I am obligated to them, right? Here's the issue. Duty creates a simulacra of a gestalt. It looks like a gestalt because we're all obligated and we have duty and we're in debt to one another, right? We're guilted, which seems to create a gestalt, but it's a simulacra of a gestalt. There is not the natural, excited, joy-filled movement together. We're moving together because we're in chains with one another. And that's why the conflation of duty and love, it depends on what you mean by duty, because there is a kind of duty in love, but not a sort of duty that is obligation guilt-based, right? But what ends up happening when people don't have the capacities for love because they haven't done Seth's work or they haven't followed their authentic resonance, they try to make up for the inability to turn an aggregate into a gestalt with love, with duty, with guilt, with these sort of things. And these are simulacras. Then it feels like a prison you can't get out of versus a music that you're excited to dance at. And so the other issue, why it is not enough anymore simply to say is love, is because most people's experience of love is actually like duty obligation based, right? And so the idea that that is what is going to fix the world, or that's going to be what helps with global pluralism, is not proper. And yet, nevertheless, it is always incredibly interesting that even when people have quote unquote bad experiences of love, that nevertheless, when you say something like love is the answer, there is still like a childlike, innocent tendency of the average person to go yes, even though a moment later they cynically go no, but it's there. And that's kind of the core I think we need to really look at. And I think it's basically love is what takes an aggregate and makes it a gestalt. And what we have to have is that gestalt. But I'll stop with that.
That childlike thing that you just said is, I think it's it's because love is always there at the start, and it's just that it just gets built up upon, with all these layers that of anxiety and defenses and experiences that teach us all sorts of ways we need to be just for ourselves, and then all sorts of ways we're only allowed to be when we're in relationships with others, and just the painful loops and reinforcements of that over time. And meanwhile, hearing around us that love is important and whatever, but listening to the other ways that people characterize love around us and absorbing those. And but you're right, even for the majority of people where love has come to be actually quite a kind of confusing, torturous thing in terms of how they play it out, even still, and even if people are quite outwardly cynical about it, even still there is something about that yeah, that sort of messaging, if you hear it, like actually love is the answer underneath all this, that people, I agree with you, they do respond to it. There is a childlike response to it, even just for a moment, and then the walls go back up again, and then we're back into, you know, I'm a cynic and whatever, but or you know, yeah, and so to me that's I mean, I think really there at the end, Daniel, you kind of just brought it all together and said sort of what I've been thinking as you were speaking too. So there's not a lot that I'll add, but I guess just in my version of words, um, I love I love I love the phrase that you were using there, Seth. That it used to be transformational learning, and now you use love, like love as transformational learning. I could not agree more. Like that is what I would say is the heart and soul of what I'm doing in therapy. I mean, I always bring it back to therapy, but you know, that is like it's a transformational learning that takes place in the relationship. That is the whole model that I use. It's yeah. And that requires, yeah, obviously requires me to be in the relationship too, right? Like it's a real thing. And then I love how that links also to what you were just saying there, Daniel, around really when we talk about love, we are talking about love being useful. Love helps us to humanize if we really look down. It's not about, because you're right, there is a real confusion. Love is not about, well, if I take a loving position towards this person, that's going to increase the chances that they'll come over to my side. It's like, you know, that increases the chances that I'll get rid of this difference and they'll come to agree with me about my position on this thing. It's because then, and people fall into that trap all the time, which is why people then grow up when they've experienced that, as an example, in their family when they're young. That's why they then grow up with this template that love equals control over me. Right? Because it's ultimately, it doesn't matter how it's done, even if it's done exactly like with kindness and curiosity and connection and play and all these things, even if someone is doing it with this like, you know, and parents do this all the time. And I'm not excluding myself from the mix here. I don't think I'm any better, but it's, you know, if I say it in this voice though, and I'm trying to be loving as I say it, but ultimately I'm just trying to control you, you know, I just want you to, because if I do this enough, you'll agree with me, and then that'll make my life easier right now. You know, and look, I know it's slightly different with parenting because there is also a role for more shaping than perhaps, you know, when you're an adult to adult, but as a general thing, I know I can understand that you guys would know what I mean by that. And so we are also participating in that era as well. It's unknowingly, and so again that goes back to layers of awareness, which I just think is so important in all of this, and working with people's layers of awareness, and even just being open to the idea that there is this whole unconscious set of stuff that has been at play all my life, like 90% of me, and I can say whatever story I want about what I've been trying to cultivate in this particular relationship. And I can report on the things that I've really consciously been trying to cultivate in the relationship. But I have to always leave open the door that there is a massive chunk too that is just not knowable to me and is not conscious to me at this point. That's really important when you're starting to look at your history of things like love, as an example, loving relationships or attempts at loving relationship. The idea that why is it that I just always somehow find myself though repeating these patterns, or with people who ultimately do this to me at the end, or you know, I'm so consciously trying not to do that. And well, maybe also there's a component underneath that is to do with a part of you that is purposely trying to replicate that over and over for all sorts of reasons, because you also learned somewhere in your unconscious that love equals someone wants to control me, so I shouldn't ever really allow that to develop. And if that's all being held hidden in the unconscious, whereas on the conscious level, you're like, but my mum always spoke like this to me and smiled and loved me and was kind when she did the controlling, as an example, right? And then subsequently every other person, then you're also kind of doing that to yourself. You're like, up on the conscious level, you're like, I'm working really hard, I'm doing the right things. I don't like, it must just be chance that I find myself in these situations over and over again. So it's the examination of layers as well that matters. I've really gone sideways there. That's not what I was trying to link together. Love is transformational learning. Love humanizes. Yeah, so love humanizes is nice because it gets us away from love equals ultimately control or changing someone, I guess is what it is. If I love them enough, they'll change, you know. I mean, you can even hear in that. Love is, you know, and I think that speaks to the whole like unconditional versus conditional love thing, you know, like a kind of really being in a loving position is the acceptance that that you know, the other person is still an independent, like there's still a person, they're going to do what they're going to do. And I can't, and actually you can get to a position of I don't even want to control them. That would not be, that would be a destructive move. To all of this. And I think that gets into the higher kind of like sacredness of all this. And I can't know why, as an example, this person has this very different political view to me, right? Like I can't ultimately know it on some level that will ever feel satisfactory to me, or like, you know, but you can love, you can find a way to, and that's and I can humanize to the degree that yeah, I'm not going to find the words now, to the degree that I can, there's kind of an acceptance or something that comes with it. And it's a humbling, actually, that's what I'm saying. It's a humbling. I would never be so powerful as to be able to anyway, change everyone around me. Like, you know, I am just as flawed as everyone else. It's that kind of thing. So love as transformational learning is beautiful because it really does capture, and I think it applies to all deep, meaningful relationships. It really characterizes, I think, the role of love, how it works on us, how it works on the other when you are in a relationship of love. When you participate in the relationship in that manner, and it is transformational to every individual in it, to things beyond it. But you can't predict what that transformation is. That's where the surprise bit comes in again. It's not about, and that's where you let go of control, and love humanizes. So I think, yeah, I think something like the series of workshops that you're doing, Seth, is that's exactly what people need. It's exactly what people need. And it's not being covered anywhere else in any sufficient depth. And it's a group thing, right? Am I right? It's group. Yeah. And I think that adds to it too. I think that's going to be really beautiful to have people in a group format go through that together. And actually to experience maybe like how the loving feelings within the group shift over time too will be really interesting. And I think I'll leave it at that. There is still I just still think too there is I'll leave it at that for now. I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, both of you have spoken to really important questions that the workshop's trying to get to. And I want to highlight the points that Daniel was making about how interconnectivity and seeing the Gestalt and a sort of phenomenology of love all go together, as well as what you were saying, Aspasia, about essentially the futility of control. Because if I try to control you, it doesn't just turn out badly for you. It usually turns out badly for me, because I cannot control you. And even, you know, parents who successfully, quote unquote, control their children, what's the overall, you know, like,
It goes underground. It goes
underground.
They haven't controlled anything.
Like, yes, you can control people, but what does that lead to, right? And also just this crucial point about really understanding what does it mean to love my enemy. So, I mean, I can safely say, if I look at Minnesota, that I am in full disagreement with what the government is doing there. You know, what the ICE agents have been tasked to do, or the way that they've been doing it. However, if I fall into the trap, you know, as Daniel said, fascist monsters versus stupid liberals, this is also, I mean, it's actually connected to, you know, to think everyone is going to agree. It's the same mistake of what Aspasia was just talking about, because how am I going to convince someone who is convinced it's a good idea to take a job with ICE that, you know, we should live in a world without borders. I mean, well, it makes perfect sense to me, so if I just keep reiterating my points and, maybe like as Aspasia says, if I use a nice tone of voice, it's like, no. And at some point, I am just refusing to see what reality is. It's not just, I mean, if I am completely sure of my view, I can feel grief that those people don't agree. I can feel grief that, potentially the disagreement that we have is leading to all this conflict. But to think that the solution is I'm going to convince them, and ultimately this question of humanization, what's underneath it is we do not agree what a human is, right? Is this person who crossed the border illegally, is that person as human as this person who was, happened to be born on this side of the border? Well, for some people that's relevant, for some it's not. But why is it relevant for some, not relevant for others? And so I'm kind of pinging back and forth. I want to bring up a reference and also share it with you, Aspasia, maybe for the show notes of our podcast. But to this question of interconnectivity, and you were asking about the workshops. What I'm doing in these workshops is obviously a series of exercises, but they're different kinds. So sometimes the exercise might involve meditation. Other times might involve journaling. Other times it might involve talking with a partner. Other times it might be a movement process where I'm relating, really noticing the sensations in my body and working with that. But it's a 2-hour workshop. And what I do at the beginning is I say, notice, what it's like to be here. And I'll say, however you were feeling 5 minutes before you checked into the Zoom call, I'm sure that what you feel right now is probably similar. However, now you're on a Zoom call. So do you feel that being on the Zoom call feels different than not being on the Zoom call? And then as we go through, I ask people to notice, how do we feel? And how do we feel after we did that exercise? And then we do the next exercise, how do we feel now? And this sense of, as Daniel's describing, the phrase I often use that Daniel referenced, the musicality of being, it is that sense of like, when you blink, I feel it. When you smile, I feel it. When I say something and your face goes, what? Like I notice, oh, maybe I need to adjust how I'm speaking. Like, and I, when I say it that way, it sounds so simple, but I mean, there's different levels of that kind of attunement. Right. And the only way to build that attunement is to actually consciously try to do that. Well, actually, I do want to say, and I appreciate every time you say, well, people need to take Seth's workshops. Yes, please, everyone watching the video, we'll put the link. I'd love to see you there. But, these are also things that people learn. Like we could go back to our algorithm, just hit that bell.
We'll just cut in and put the ad now. There'll be a big advertisement. Yeah.
Right.
Only the best shots of your face.
Flashing letters across the screen. But you look at it, you look at a sports team who's just displaying incredible teamwork, and it looks like an organism made out of many people, right? Whether pick your favorite sport, but they're flowing together. They're like the one person realizes that the other player has run down, to the other end of the field, and they pass the ball without even looking, and they say, how did they know? Because they sensed it somehow, and they're just at a higher level of paying attention to the Gestalt, or feeling the Gestalt, as Daniel was speaking to. So yeah, but the thing that so the piece that I wanted to share with you, and it speaks directly to this point about loving your enemies. So I'm partway through listening to a podcast between Thomas Hubel, who I've mentioned before, who places an emphasis on collective trauma, he calls it, and also ancestral trauma. So this is, again, an orientation to the Gestalt. But he did an interview with a woman by the name of Dia Khan, and I'm just looking at something here so that I get some of the particulars about her correct. So she's from Norway, born of Muslim immigrants. And I'm just going to read one paragraph off her website. It's just part of her bio, but there's a direct connection that Daniel's going to recognize. It says, Dia has filmed with battle-hardened jihadis, members of armed militia groups, American domestic terrorists, and white supremacists, with incisive, illuminating, and often surprising results. After spending a number of months filming with members of the United States' largest neo-Nazi organization, including filming them on their notoriously violent march through Charlottesville in 2017, 3 high-ranking figures, including the leader, left the movement and rejected its white supremacist ideology. All of them credit their encounters with Dia as the catalyst for them to leave the extremist movement. And in this podcast, she describes that there was a moment in Charlottesville where one of these guys literally was looking out for her physical safety for her in that situation, which got violent. And one woman, I believe, was killed, if not more. I don't, Daniel knows, because I think you were in Charlottesville at the time. But she addresses also something that you spoke to, Aspasia, sort of skepticism, like some people would say to her, like, well, that's just 3 people. And she's like, you're missing the point. The point is, when we act this way, this is the kind of change that could happen. And honestly, I mean, the reason I'd love for you to share, the clip is, if anyone is watching our conversation today, I would hope they go and watch that conversation as well. I really think that this is what's called for today, and it's, I mean, there's different, we're not all going to be making that documentary. We're not all going to go meet the political opposition face to face, but on another level, it's like meeting your neighbor, to Daniel, when we were speaking the other day, and you were saying how Jesus is talking about love your neighbor, he's also talking about the country that borders yours, which often, was so it's not just your next door neighbor in suburbia. So like, there really is this capacity of stretching ourselves. And she makes the point in that conversation too. She says, I never went into the situation with the intention to change this person's mind. She says she reached out to all kinds of guys in these right-wing groups, and no one responded until one guy responded and said, no, I won't meet with you. And so that was the opening. And I guess eventually he does meet with her, and they set up an interview in a motel room, and he says, I'll be there I'll go for 1 hour and then I'll leave. And then she realizes, I don't even know, is he going to show up with a gun? She had all these fears. They ended up talking for 5 hours. Right. And so they got really curious about each other. And as human beings, they discovered all of these things. And she talks about when she was young in Norway, she said, yeah, I used to go to the anti-fascist protests. I used to scream and curse and yell at the fascists, and it felt really good to me then. But over time, I learned it didn't do anything. It didn't change anything. It was. And so she eventually, finds herself doing this other thing where she sits and talks with the person. And she said another thing that came up is, like, they started to realize, oh, you experienced that and you experienced that. And so she'd say, like, I could never agree with his ideology, but when we started to talk about family and how we love our children, we totally understood each other, and that kind of thing, and so
we remembered we were both human.
Right. And what I'm talking about here doesn't sound anything like play, but that's why I said before, part of what I mean by play is engagement. So it's not always like,
you have to be playful to do that. You have to be playful.
Yeah. You have to be playful in the sense that you just say, here I go. So play,
step out of the usual bounds. I think it's like a stepping out of the usual bounds of behavior, like a willingness to just curve around. And can I just say very quickly, I'll let you finish, Seth.
Please, no, that's good.
But part of what I'm hearing there too is that, like, this, potentially, I'm guessing, but this guy's probably never had someone show such deep attunement.
Oh, yes. So actually, she says that. She's like, when you talk to these guys, what you find out is no one's ever listened to them.
No attunement.
Because she also did the same thing with jihadis.
Yep.
And she says the first person that ever listened to them was a recruiter.
Yes.
and that person might have been doing it in a cynical way because they know how they're going to,
manipulate
work with this person's wounding for their political ends. But the point is, she says the thing that you should really notice is all the people who didn't listen before the recruiter came and found, this person. And to this question of, Daniel's always speaking about the incels or the hikimori, the people who feel totally isolated. God, there's nothing they would love more than just someone out of the blue going, hey, who are you? I'm really curious about you. I'd love to know your story. Oh, and you've been through difficulties? Tell me about them. But you can do that in such a cynical way, or we could actually do that because we're all human and because we're trying to figure out the Gestalt. I mean, the fact is, we don't know what it means to be human if we only know what it means to be a certain kind of human. So because how diverse is humanity? I mean, we're not going to get to know 8 billion people, but the more diverse is the group of people that we are in relation to, I would say, is kind of going to boost our capacity to actually really be human. So I'll pass it on from here.
The play there too is because to do that, to get in there and do those movements that allow you to even get to the place where you can give a person an experience of deep attunement is also the willingness and the ability inside yourself to be able to sort of first of all, you got to sort of meet them at their level. You don't just go diving into, listen, I believe there's a deep wounding going on here that we should look at. And, you would not launch into a first therapy session like that as therapist, So you have to, there's a staging kind of thing. I do think that's playful. I think that the people, even therapists that do that the best, because there's a natural intuitiveness to it as well, and a sincerity, are the ones that are the best able to be playful because of that reason. It's I don't know how to explain it. It's not manufactured.
When I talk about play, one of the aspects I say for play is the capacity to match energies.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
About the adult who knows how to play with the kid before, but it could just be, the Christian who knows how to converse with the Muslim. It's the same thing. It's a matching of energies.
That's exactly it. Because it's like in therapy again. Obviously every client that walks through the door, they can be wildly different. It's not just a little bit different. You get just wildly different. And so even though kind of the work and the principles are the same thing, and I'm still my same person, there's a way that I think therapists can learn to do the matching that's more it doesn't come from a more intuitive place, and it doesn't come from a place where you as a person, not as a therapist, actually have been playful a lot, have experienced and trained and enjoy your playfulness, or however you think about that. They are just doing it as a technique again, oh, he uses those words, so I should match those words. It's a calculation, I guess, if we go back to that. So the playfulness is so important, because if you're willing to be playful in life generally and be playful in relationships generally, this becomes just more, I guess, natural, intuitive. So I'm just going back to that example you were talking about there. I think her ability to match that guy and his email back saying no in whatever way she did is step one. And then even the going there and the way they would have first started to speak, that requires a lot of movement and I guess what we would call moment to moment intervention, just moment to moment. It's always moment to moment. It's not and that is playful. In my mind, that's playful, because I always go, when you talk about playful, I think about dancing. It's just that willingness to just and again,
the funny thing is, before she was a filmmaker, she was a professional musician.
Oh, there you go. You always find this. I don't talk about it a lot, but I did a lot of drama and stuff when I was younger as well, and there was music, but in a strange way. And so there's something about having places where you learn that play is good and connecting and generative and helpful, as opposed to it's just a silly thing, and actually you need to sit still and stop playing. Playing is for indulgent, and you do that when you've done all your homework, that kind of thing, which is really what people learn. Or play is dangerous, because the only people who are really going to play with you are the people in your life who are probably predators, or because everyone else around you is so anti-play, and then we're always hungry for play, and then you find the people that are willing to do it, and it's manipulative, or they're predators, or like, you know, they're recruiters, and because with play comes attunement. Actually, with play comes attunement, because if someone's really willing to put down their stuff and play with you, you're going to learn and see a lot about them, and they're going to learn and see a lot about you in that, because it's very vulnerable. Play is vulnerable. You can make mistakes and reveal things and stuff and play much more easily than when you're being ordered. Anyway, sorry that I got very into that. There you go.
That's against the rules.
I know. Damn it! I didn't do my homework first either. I had ice cream before dinner.
No, there's something about play is finding out how to love. Like if you don't have play, you don't find out how to love. And love that's not playful doesn't feel very loving. Yeah, we kicked out all the spaces where people could play, and so we never learned that play creates the conditions of possibility for new direction. Like play is what you know, that's play is not work. And so people don't learn drama, they don't learn music. That's all extracurricular. You either have talent for that or not. And basically that's a coded way of saying it has the potential of being a job or not. You know, and if you have talent, it's potential for money. And if you don't have talent, it's not potential for money, therefore it's invalid. So talent is just a coded language of markets often, and specialization. Well, if play opens new possibilities for new direction, and play's over here and work is there, then work can only go one direction. And if that's a direction that can't turn a collection into a gestalt, then we're just going to have an aggregate that can't move together and therefore fights. There's a few things. It should be noted first, Gestalt and Holy Spirit go together. There's something about the idea of Holy Spirit being a community of Holy Spirit. So this idea of the church being Holy Spirit is the idea that church is Gestalt more than a building. Now, we have to be careful before we demonize buildings, because buildings can be great and they have an important role. But there's something about the church originally having this kind of Gestalt character, this kind of, even if you're on the other side of the world and I'm here, nevertheless, when I lift my hand, it somehow moves you. Almost like a butterfly effect, honestly, this kind of notion that the church is this thing that always moves together, no matter what it does and where it is, right? And so that's Holy Spirit, and that's a logic of love, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, there's some sort of mystery where the only way to access Holy Spirit and Gestalt and love as such requires crucifixion, death, cross, and suffering, right? Like love is on the other side of suffering, right? But love shouldn't be suffering in the sense of duty and guilt and control and oppressive and all of that, right? So we have to get all these things in the right order, because we're going to get them all one way or the other, and they're either going to be in the right order to make possible the Gestalt, or they're going to all be together in a mess and chaos and things like that. There's something about love that is a certain, in being humanization, there's a certain act of you make the person not you, and you're glad in it. Like when you humanize someone, you make them not you. Like to humanize them is to say you are different, and then I'm glad in it. When really the natural thing to do is you are different and I hate it, therefore I want to control you into me. But there is some sort of double move of making them different, or being committed to really believing they're different and accepting their difference and genuinely being glad in it, right? That seems to be the great challenge of love. And that is the necessity for a Gestalt. Like, because in that moment of kind of sacrifice where you say you're different and I'm glad in it, meaning I'm giving up control, that precisely makes the interconnectivity possible. That's the weird move. When you give up control, now a jazz improvisation is possible. When you give up control, now a Gestalt is possible. Until you give up control, all you can have is an aggregate. Control is the bag the marbles go in that create, again, the illusion of a Gestalt, but it's just a collection, right? And for most people, love is control, because if they don't know how to love, the thing most like love, quote unquote, is control, because you're keeping things together and it seems to be making things work, but really it doesn't have an inner life. Like Gestalt has an inner life. Like there's a life in the inner. There's like an inner activity that is going on that puts everything together, and control just makes a simulacra of that. But again, if people don't have Seth's class and they don't know what authentic resonance is, control is the best they can do. But it's an unacceptable mistake. Now, what's also interesting with this, you mentioned the quality of missing people and how you have a certain gladness in it. Well, there's a way in which, when they're not here, there's a certain way of being glad they're out there adding to the gestalt of life, out there creating. Like they're out there actually adding to the unfolding of all things. And even if I don't know where they are, I know they're out there adding to the movement of all things. They're adding to the unfolding dance. And likewise, if they're dead and they're no longer with you, you miss them. But there's also a glad that they were there to be lost because they are in the dance of the unfolding of all things, right? So likewise, love is actually doing something very similar. And of course, there's an argument to be made that if you miss someone, there's a kind of love in that, right? So love, likewise, when you love someone, there's a certain, you are different and I'm glad in it, which is a certain, you are different, therefore you expand the creativity, because difference means something new has been created, right? Difference is a creativity almost by definition. And so you're glad that creativity worked here and made a difference. You're glad that creativity didn't make a replica, right? Like love is, love is when you stop desiring replicas, replications, and you actually come to be glad for creativity. Right. Most of the time when we talk about creativity, really what we want is replication. But it's just reproduction, an artificial creation that's nothing more than a mimesis. But love is actually where you're moving to the place of, no, you're different and I'm glad in it. And therefore there's creativity. And in that difference is now, oddly, the possibility of the harmony that is the gestalt. If it's all the same, there's no gestalt. Weirdly, when things are the same, there's only an aggregate. You would think when they're the same, you'd get a gestalt, but actually no. When everything's the same, they're just an aggregate. They can't work together. If you have all pianos on the stage, you can't get a symphony. You can get an aggregate of pianos, you can get a collection of pianos, but you can't get a gestalt. Gestalts require difference. And yet, that's counterintuitive. The natural thought is if everyone is the same, then we will get a gestalt. No, you get an aggregate. But that means you have to be able to handle difference. And there is something about missing love that is a certain kind of gladness in this thing that is unfolding that has this interconnectivity to it, or at least is possible, or at least is working out to be more so realized, that there is this, dare I say, force that is the movement of Gestalt. It's trying to move all of the aggregates into the Gestalt, and it's working against the aggregates to bring them into Gestalt. And although the work is not done at this moment, it is nevertheless unfolding and working to be working to be done. And there's a gladness in that unfolding, I think. I think also what we've been saying about the surprise as well is surprise, because you also mentioned how, like, at the beginning, Seth, snow's going to happen. There's going to be a surprise. Something, life is such that a surprise is going to occur. The surprise is the confirmation that you have a gestalt versus an aggregate. Because if there's a surprise and it breaks you, it turns out it wasn't a gestalt, it was just an aggregate. So surprise is necessary to be able to tell the difference between an aggregate and a gestalt. Something that seems like it's together, but it's actually not together. It was controlled together because surprise is what destroys control, right? Because surprise is the opposite of control. And so the reason why surprise is so important is because surprise is actually, in a weird way, a kind of Flannery O'Connor grace to actually then unveil to you if it was actually a gestalt or if it actually was always an aggregate. And when you find out it's an aggregate, that's terrible, but it's also a grace, because now, wouldn't it have been terrible if your whole life you were just in an aggregate and never had the experience of a gestalt? So that terribleness is actually this Flannery O'Connor grace that awakens you to the possibility of the movement into the gestalt. And it's very easy to live all of life in simulacras and never move into the gestalts. But the surprise in the encounter in the other is the mechanism of precisely testing and confirming if this is a gestalt or not. And if a gestalt by definition is that of which handles surprise. Like that is what a gestalt is, as opposed to a machine. A machine works together because it's programmed together. A gestalt is that when you throw the unexpected, it actually all moves and it works with it, right? A gestalt is when a note is hit that wasn't expected. All of the instruments then change together, right? Without surprise, there would not be gestalt. There would just be machine. There would just be coincidence. But a gestalt is precisely possible because of surprise, and the glory and wonder of the gestalt is precisely unveiled in the surprise, right? So what ends up happening is the surprise. There's a kind of like final. There's a kind of, and I have more notes, but I'll stop with it. There's a kind of apocalypse with surprise, a kind of revelation. And what I mean by that, the apocalypse is the unveiling, like where you find out, the horror or the heaven, right? And the apocalypse is actually the prerequisite to quote unquote New Jerusalem and new creation. And what ends up happening in the surprise, you get the apocalypse, the revelation of if it's a Gestalt or not, right? Which is a very hard thing to bear, but actually, if you bear it, it becomes a wondrous thing. And so in global, this is the interesting dimension of global pluralism. Global pluralism is so difficult because it will accept nothing less than a Gestalt. It is the end of the plausible deniability or historics, I suppose history's permissiveness to let us get away with simulacras of gestalts and simulacras of togetherness and simulacras of love. This is the kind of age that will no longer accept anything less than the real deal. You either have an actual gestalt or it will be unveiled to merely be an aggregate. You actually have love or it will be unveiled to be control. This is a kind of age of apocalypse and global pluralism because nothing less will do than the actually fully human, than the actual interconnectivity of Gestalt. And in that way, there's a certain cruelty and hardness to it, but there's also a kind of grace because, my gosh, how wonderful to live in an age that will accept nothing less than being fully human. We might finally be motivated to do it then. We might finally put in the work to realize it, and who knows what we might be capable of as a humanity if we finally rise to the occasion of being ourselves, which up into this moment of history we've been putting off as much as possible. Nothing less will do anymore than realizing the fullness of Gestalt, which does demand a lot of us, but who wants to live a life when anything less is demanded of us than all that we can possibly be? So this moment has a great grace to it, even though it has a great challenge to it. But I do believe in the possibility of what the human can rise to the occasion of, if only we would, well, invest ourselves fully in it. And I think love's an invitation to that.
I can't talk now, so you talk.
Well, I think there's a wisdom in that as well.
It finally shut me up.
No.
I know that's not what you meant. That was my joke to stop my tears. Yeah.
Well, you're speaking volumes, and that's, what would be the opposite right now is if you were to control it, right? And say, I won't show this. I won't allow this expression that is already happening naturally. Because if someone is crying, it's easy to look and say, oh, that seems painful. But actually, the easiest thing that person can do right now is allow those tears to come, right? Because that's the reality. I know you're making connections to things beyond what we're, directly speaking about here. But, I just want to underline that I don't think it's an interruption at all on the level of the podcast. It's only underlining what we're saying. And I think if we try to move things along here in a way where we're doing the opposite of what we're speaking about, so
thank you for that, Seth. I think it's yeah, because there's the relationship between the three of us where actually I would a lot more would have come out there in my cry. Like I would have cried a lot more. That's one way of thinking about it. There is something about the knowledge that it's, even though I reminded myself, I mean, I wouldn't cut it out because I agree with you. I think it's important to showcase it. But I reminded myself, I could just be freer with this. I could always just cut that bit out if for some reason I decide I don't want it on the internet. And even still, there's something about it being recorded that still, it's like this inhibiting force, which is multi-layered, I think, for me, just given what I do. And yeah.
Well, and I mean, that too is also multi-layered though, because we've always talked about, Daniel likes to call the internet the social coordinating mechanism.
I know.
How many people typically, find in their social media feed someone, who's showing even partially this level of emotion? It's not that you're the only person who's ever showed up authentically in public.
About sincerely, like from a sincere place too, like not a marketing.
Exactly. Well, and I think it goes right to what Daniel was just saying. There's nothing less than this. Like, of course, it's always valid to say, I'm going to turn my camera off right now, if that's, because we need to begin with, we have to be kind to ourselves. If I imagine that your choice to be here right now is something that is not coming from duty, as Dan said, it's not obligation. It's a desire to be here. And then, like when the podcast ends, you can do things that you don't want to have on the internet, just as I plan to as well. Do other things that I don't share with our millions of viewers on our highly popular conversation series.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's why. Sorry, that was part of the absurdity of me noting that there's such an inhibitory force to knowing that it's being recorded for my internet channel, because it's like, makes it sound like it's this whole. They're going to be writing about it in the newspapers.
But you were just speaking to the therapists who are using technique on clients as opposed to relating to them as people, right? So, I mean,
yep.
Hey, if Aspasia is your therapist, I'd just like to point out that she's also a human being.
I think they know that for other reasons, my clumsiness, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, but even that, right? Like, not to make light of any of it, but part of being human, which is also a cliche, is that we're imperfect, right? So, are we willing to be imperfect? And that's why I love being around the people who love me, because I don't feel so anxious that I need to be perfect, right? I actually know that, I mean, so there's love kind of gives a grace in that way, which is so helpful. But then, it's sort of mind-blowing, like, well, the idea of, will we finally be the generation of humanity that steps up to the plate in the way that Daniel's speaking about? But these stories like Diakon and these three right-wing guys who just by virtue of interacting with this woman who's Muslim, and in the beginning their ideology tells them that they must hate her, they just discover, the more time I spend with her, the harder it is to hate her. Funny thing, and
can I say quick, sorry,
yeah,
something else that comes to mind as you say that too is probably too also the contrast that those people experience. So the kind of attunement that she was able to offer that guy, if we go back to the example, gives if the only kind of deep attunement he has really experienced is from, say, the recruiter, right? And then this is the necessary contrast. It's like I can experience a different way in which attunement works on me and feels, and that's also, and again, not to say that this is all about changing people's minds, but that is also part of what helps people to break out of their very rigid set ways of looking at things. Is I've only ever had one way to experience this thing for whatever reason, and now I experience it in this new way. And so, yeah, anyway, continue.
When you authentically communicate to me that you're not trying to change my mind, it actually becomes easier for me to change my mind.
That's right.
Because I realize it's up to me what I think in your presence. If I think this, you're okay with it. And if I think that, you're also okay with it. So actually, now I can look at the difference between this and that without any pressure, rather than thinking this is what Aspasia would like to hear and that is what she would not like to hear. I realize, oh, she's okay either way. Now suddenly I have this, if there were 100 people who really attuned to me in life, then who would I be, right? Like maybe, people like to talk about that sort of idea that you're the result of the 5 people you spend the most time with or whatever. But if maybe you're the result of the five most humanizing people that you spend time with. And I mean, obviously,
levels of connection again, right? No, but it's levels of connection again. It's like it's not the most time you spend with someone, it's
right.
At which level are you connecting, and are you your core self or your defended self? Yeah, it's another way.
Right, but if the person who's most attuned to me is the pastor, then I might become Christian.
That's
but
right.
If the person who's most attuned to me is, the football coach, then I might be the star athlete. But if it's the football coach and the pastor and my younger sister and my best friend, and I have 20 people of 20 different kinds. I mean, even if it's only a certain range of diversity within my community, then suddenly I'm like, wow, I could play football, I could go into the church, or I could do both, or I could do neither, because they also made it clear to me that, like, them loving me doesn't depend on me being exactly like they are. Suddenly, like, my sense of self-worth has more room to move, right? I can be lovable if I go over here. I can be lovable if I go over there. I can be lovable, as we've discussed, if I read philosophy, if I don't read philosophy, if I do all of these things, and then suddenly there's all these other options. There's actually one of the things I talked about love, and then transformational learning, and then realizing, oh, I was actually using those as synonyms without knowing it. So another phrase that I thought about a lot for a long time, because I trained in the Feldenkrais method, was this phrase from Moshe Feldenkrais, where he's describing very graceful movement. And usually this phrasing is, you imagine a body gracefully moving through space, right? That would be the primary context. Although in his teaching, he does actually make clear this could apply to emotion, this could apply to mindset. But the phrase is, he's describing what he calls good posture. We spoke about this once on the net. He says, it's the ability to move in any direction at any time without preparation or hesitation. But then at a certain point, I thought, oh yeah, that's love. That's what love is capable of, right? Because I love you. I didn't know you liked that kind of movie, but I guess with you, I'd be willing to go watch a horror movie. Like, I never watch horror movies, but you love horror movies. I love you. I'll try out watching a horror movie this weekend, or whatever. But love responds in ways that fear can't respond. Like, so if we talk about agility in that sense of grace, love is agile. Like, or the highest versions of love. I mean, obviously we can expand it, however far we can expand it. But again, that's why I say, just relative to my own life, when I feel loved, when I feel loving, as opposed to the day that I feel resentful and bitter and no one cares about me, on that loving day, I'm a more agile version of myself, even if I'm not as agile as that other person, and I never will be. The most agile version of me is the day that love is really prominent in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I was getting at with the love and the play bit before too. Yeah, it is that I think too, I'm just kind of saying the opposite of what you just said partially there, Seth, too, but there's, again, this goes back to the other side of what we're saying too, is that, if people have experienced that, my most meaningful relationships in my life are actually the ones where people are loving, like, my defenses, like my defended self, like me, not who I really am, not me in my most authentic form. Then I come to learn that increases the chances that I come to really believe that is who I am. That's all I am. Does that make sense? So, like you build up these kind of defended ways of being, and in doing that, you're getting this kind of like loving responses from no one. And that's why attunement matters, because no one interrogates further. No one takes the time to suggest, is that really what's going on for you? Like, are you really just that? It's actually okay if you do a bit of that. It's actually like no one takes that time. They just accept what you present to them, which is what I'm calling defended self, right? And if the more that you build up, well, or that is, people love me through being that way, then that cements your own belief that is really who you are, and that's not defended. That's who I am, and that's painful in its own right as well. So that's attunement matters here. And again, I guess this relates to therapy, but it just relates to people. It really doesn't just relate to therapy. Attunement matters here because it is someone taking a moment to maybe see something in you that is deeply hidden, that you don't normally let come out. And again, sometimes you might know it's there, sometimes you don't even know it's there. So you might be resistant at first. But it's like pointing out the glimmers, essentially, if we use that language. And that takes a certain kind of person to be willing to do that for you. And through doing that, you might actually come to see that there is more to you than just this version of you. And through doing that, then if you come to share that deeper or more core or broader, whatever, however you talk about it, the more pure, the whole of you, as opposed to this kind of compromised you that squeezes up through all these compromised formations. If you come to be able to show the whole of you to a person, and then you experience their love back about that version of you, that is much more, that's when love is experienced differently. Everything is experientially different. I think that's just such a powerful, it's just such a powerful experience. And then that gives you, obviously, that helps a person to have license to be that, to be who they really are, if we put it in those terms, gives them license to be in touch with all of who they are, more frequently, and also just within themselves, because there are these two layers. There's our relationship to who we are that we know privately versus what we're willing to share with another person. I think people get stuck with that sometimes too. So lots of people might actually be more in touch with the whole of who they are inside, but they have real problems with being able to take the step to share it, right? So they're still coming across as defended in relationships, but there's much more awareness inside them. But for many more people, I would say, they're not even fully aware inside themselves yet. And but the healing of that, if we call it healing, is through relationship. It's through actually other people, not other people treating them in such a way and being attuned to them in such a way, being playful, being curious, being kind, all these things that actually helps a person to unlock within them that actually there's more to me. And then through doing that, I might also be able to share that with others, and that increases love. So the loving is just as important as being loved, is essentially what I'm trying to say. There's this real reciprocal thing that goes, like, we need one another. This is actually, I guess, this is how we can say we might need each other, in that experiencing someone being genuinely loving to us, attunement, playfulness, the security, like all these things, not for the sake of controlling or bringing you over to my side or making you how I need you to be for me, but just because I recognize that that is how a person gets to really unlock and open up who they are inside, which then increases their capacity to also be able to be more loving to others. Whatever that leads to, and again, this leads to, it's not about, because then that would lead to this outcome where everyone is a liberal. Like it's not that. It's oh damn. It's just because that's the bit that to me just feels intuitive. I don't even know why, but I believe with everything inside me that is the most important thing. It's a trust and a faith in where that would lead, and that just leads to the Gestalt and everything that you guys have elegantly said before this. That's kind of what I mean too when I was talking about at the start, that I've been crying more than usual, which is a lot, in the last sort of week. And there are some reasons I know why that is. And there is something about it that still feels like I'm yet to figure out exactly why that is. But there is I just always trust that process. And so there is something about that feels like I'm on the verge of something that, I want to say there's an excitement to it, but I don't at all want that to mean that it's an enjoyable process. But there's it requires the trust and the faith. I don't know how that links now, where I've gone, but anyway.
It's like an unveiling, as
Beautiful.
Danny was.
Thank you.
Allow the emotion. Sometimes the emotion's wisdom precedes the thinking mind saying, oh, it's because of that.
Yes.
But if I'm willing to cry because I feel like crying, I might find out why I'm crying.
Yeah, it's like a birth. It's like a birthing. I mean, I guess I'm lucky through my work to know this very deeply now, but I think I've kind of known this for even preceding that. There's a kind of quality to that feeling wanting to come up and emerge that I know is that type. Like I can't avoid this even if I wanted to. I could play lots of games with myself and try and like avoid this now for 10 years, whatever is trying to come up. But I know that this is an important thing, and I know that this is a wise thing, and so it's really weird, the difference in quality of that sensation that goes with those sorts of tears versus all the other kinds of tears. Because I don't even know that it necessarily has a feeling name. I think it's like this big ball of almost all the feelings in one, that come with it. Like these aren't tears of pain. There's some pain in there. These aren't tears of grief. There's some grief in there. These aren't tears of I don't know, like, it's kind of all of it. It's like loving and hurting and griefful and like all the feelings. Tears of Gestalt. Oh, that sounds like a 90s album title, doesn't it?
The Genesis album.
We do
You're
need to
right.
record an
You're
album
right,
at
though.
some point. So
I actually love, we do. That's going to be a good album. I'm going to be really active on that album. You guys will actually play instruments and I'll play my like 4 notes of the saxophone that I remember. Okay. All right.
Fantastic.
That's probably all you need on a saxophone, to be honest. And yeah.
I want to make one other quick interjection because I'm really dying to hear what
I
Daniel
do love
has
the Tears
to say,
of Gestalt. I want to work on that one. Yes, keep going.
Well, I also just want to put this out even to people listening, and if I can throw the fishing line and invite you to make a comment. But eventually, I really do hope that the three of us will bring together some of what we've been doing. I would love to, at the very least, have one or both of you as a guest teacher in a workshop, around these questions at some point.
Anytime, Seth. Anytime.
Yeah. So we'll do that.
I say anytime, depending on our very strict time zone overlap.
Anytime except when you're asleep.
Anytime, which really means these 3 hours on these 2 days. But anytime, friend.
So when Daniel's not speaking, I'm just always watching the ideas like generating and like forming, and so I have a feeling that like there's a lot there's a lot germinating, but
and I know you have to finish by the hour too, Seth, so I'll make sure we do that. I do just want to say on the Tears of Gestalt, though, I think that's precisely it. That's right on the money. It's like and I think about that as like core emotion. I think like core emotion, it doesn't really have one of these feeling labels. It's like this whole mass. It's like it's got all of them, and then it differentiates, which is still important. And I think that matches the moments of getting in touch with it, with the Gestalt, right? And so the feeling state matches it. Please, Daniel, take us out with.
No, I don't know. Well, I think it is almost a kind of grace that, tears are what you do enjoy and sadness, because if you had a different thing that your eyes did, for example, then you could be led to believe by how your body behaved that these things could be separated. When in fact, I think basically to live to the fullness of what it is to be human requires getting invested in things in such a manner that they can destroy you, which is precisely why they are beautiful, where you can have the possibility of loss, because that's the only way to not control. Like, if there's no possibility of loss, that's mean you're controlling, and that means it's simulacra and it's artificial. So like the very fact that tears have this multivalence is almost a kind of grace of the body, because if it didn't mix things together, it could kind of mislead you into thinking that highest life can actually separate the sad and the beautiful, the joy and the sad. So there's a grace in that. I think, again, we were saying that there is something about our moment, and this is what I think, that our moment basically accepts nothing less than Gestalt. And I think because of that, there are simulacras of that Gestalt, various temptations. There's the singularity, kind of technological singularity. There is the kind of solipsism, where you're the only one who exists temptation, and therefore you're all that is, because no one else exists, that is manifest in the hikikomori, or forms of transhumanism, which is basically simulation, and I'll get what I want. So we're in an age where we have to choose some sort of whole, right? Do we want it to be a whole where we're all that exists and nothing else does, which is the kind of isolationist strategy? Do we want a whole in which basically we mediate difference through technology versus personhood? Or do we want a whole where actually the whole is a result of us learning how to mediate difference as human beings, right? That's what we have to choose, because we've interconnected the world with technology and global, like everything is connected now. So we have to decide the quality of that connection. Like, that's what we've decided. That's what this moment has brought us to. And basically, if we don't learn what Seth is presenting, the choice is going to either be it's either going to be singularity and the technology transhumanist sort of way, or it's going to be the singularity of the hikikomori. Like, it's going to be one of those two. Unless we can learn how to humanize, then we have the option of a Gestalt, right? So, and that choice is upon us, and that's an absolute choice of the historic moment. I think also it's very interesting to what you were saying, Seth. When someone wants to change your mind, then they're less likely to change your mind. Well, that's because they're less likely to join you in a Gestalt. Like, if I'm trying to control you, then there's no Gestalt, right? When I don't try to change your mind, actually, it creates the possibility of interconnectivity, because I'm not controlling. Therefore, you can start to move with me, and I can start to move with you. And another thing that we can't will is empathy. We say it's important to empathize. You can't just will to empathize, dang it. Like, you can't switch a switch. You can tell yourself they're different. No. Empathy comes from dancing with them. Gestalt, interrelation. Like, you empathize when you begin moving with them, but you can't just magically will to move with them. Like a calculation, okay, they'll move left and I'll move right. That's how you suck at dancing. Like, you have to just kind of sense it. You have to discern it and move with them, right? Well, that's all Gestalt. You can't really learn empathy unless you learn how to.
It happens to
Yes, it
you.
happens
You don't
to
go,
you.
have
Yes,
empathy. I'll do it now. Yeah.
that's right. It happens to you. You find yourself always already in it. That character of finding yourself always already in it is the characteristic of the interrelativity that James Wiggy says defines a Gestalt. You find yourself in empathy is something you find yourself in. And then, of course, this is a big deal because in my opinion, you literally can't critically think without empathy. Like, you literally cannot critically think unless you develop empathy. What we were saying is the possibility of critical thinking. The prerequisite for it is Gestalt. It is this interrelativity, which the prerequisite of that is humanizing the other. And if our biggest problems today, like Minnesota or whatever, requires quote unquote critical thinking to figure out, well, then the precondition for that is going to be the Gestalt and the humanizing everyone to create a moving whole, not because you're making everyone think together, because there's a humanization that occurs that opens up thinking and possibilities that otherwise cannot be there. Right. And like, when I say things like that, like, for example, what makes a person become an ICE agent? Like, what makes them become that? What is the condition offering that makes them do that, right? You start identifying that, say, well, let's start thinking about the social capital, the education system, and what is there that would lead to that, right? So what leads to people being illegal immigrants? What leads to them doing that, right? You start thinking those possibilities, right? Like, there's something about humanization that makes you a better thinker, dang it, because you actually start going, what leads people to doing these things? What were the incentives in order, right? Like, it would be a very large question, but like, also it would be a larger question, and I know we're running out of time, but when you humanize someone, you also come to understand their incentives and why they do what they did and how they came to be that they were, right? Like, so for example, a lot of people say, well, why don't the illegal immigrants just do the legal immigration system? The legal immigration system is a corrupt mess. The lawyers steal your money, they lose your papers, especially if you're third world. Now, if you're first world and you've got critique, you can probably get a good lawyer and do okay. It is incredibly difficult to actually get into the United States of America legally, even if you wanted to, because of the amount. There are so many people that are taken advantage of in the legal immigration policy that it's a mess. And we don't, and here's the issue, because we may not humanize the immigrant, we don't feel a necessity to create the political will to change the legal immigration issue, right? Because a lot of what we're seeing now reflects the political will, right? Well, why is the political will X and not Y, right? Well, the political will flows relative to the humanization that has occurred, right? We have not made it a priority to fix the legal immigration system. We have not really felt that. Which then you have to ask the question, well, why did we prioritize the illegal immigration problem and stopping that, right? Well, probably because it's easier to create a panic and a crisis and get people to vote for your party, right? When you talk about like political will for reforming legal immigration and dealing with all that, that's not exciting. That's boring. That's bureaucratic. And all the lawyers who are like funding your campaign benefit from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm saying is that like, and I'm saying all of that because literally people in the illegal immigration debate basically now are thinking it's ICE or open borders, right? That binary thinking reflects an terrain of a lack of humanization. Like that is so unthoughtful. Those options, it reflects that we have not been humanizing people to think better about the situations, to motivate the political will to actually freaking fix things.
Yeah.
And so there's a really funny way in which humanization, you can't think what you need to do for your society unless you humanize the other person, because you can't critically think and you can't generate the political will to do things that need to be done. And so then you just get caught in this, well, it's either or, right? Like that's downstream of the inability to generate actual thinking, because the ability to generate actual thinking is tied to the ability to generate a gestalt, and that is tied to the ability to humanize. I would argue highest thought occurs in a gestalt, like the jazz improvisation. Oh my gosh, like how did they do this, right? That kind of movement is where thinking actually happens. And outside of that, you're not even going to have real thinking. Something else that's really interesting. And Joachim brings up this point all the time. For Aristotle, it is not possible to hate an actual person. You can only hate an abstraction. Like hatred is always of an abstraction. So when you hate the immigrant or the illegal immigrant, or you hate the ICE agent, they're a category, they're abstract, right? Because what Aristotle is getting at is once you fully learn the story, like fully learn the story of the ICE agent, fully learn the story of the person, you may disagree with them. You may still like want to get them out of power. You may want to still put them in jail, but the hatred goes away because you come to understand what made them what they are, right? Like even if you learn, you can take the Aristotle. Now you could disagree with this point, but what Aristotle is saying is very powerful. Let us get the most corrupt, perverted, billionaire or whatever that you can think of, right? Well, when you actually learn when you actually go through the story of how they made all this money because their dad didn't appreciate them, and then they got to the top and they could never figure out how to love their wife because they prioritize work so much and there's no intimacy, and then they fall into all of these perversions and taking advantage of people actually to get control to create a simulacra of love. You may still decide that they are quote unquote a monster and need to go to jail, but there is a certain sort of humanization that occurs, right? There's a certain sort of I see how you got here, right? Well, here's the key. If you see how they got here, then you start really having true political thinking, because you say, what's the society that got them here? And what is the way that families are done and how we think about entertainment and whatever that would create the structure that would lead the person here? And now we have real political thinking. Now we're actually thinking. So the great irony is that in the name of being serious and really thinking about policy and like how to fix immigration or whatever, we look at all the humanization and empathy stuff as other and out of the way of it, when actually, unless we do that work, we can't even freaking think what we need to think to deal with the present moment. So it's not a one or the other. It's first things first, you get second things also. I think also, I guess, and I know we're out of time, there's been a moment as well, like it's just very interesting, because if we look at like Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, and the nonviolent resistance, there was a notion in that the only way to kind of bring about serious political change is some sort of effort to humanize the person. And if the African American is beaten by the officer, that somehow creates a humanizing effect. Now, there's many reasons for this. Like, if they're not resisting, then how can I assume justice is on my side, for example? Second, the officer has to reflect on themselves and ask, am I so sure I'm doing the right thing? Which then humanizes them. But there's this effect of humanization that occurs, right? Through the kind of nonviolent resistance, which is a certain kind of idea that if I don't, also is tied to this, if I do not violently resist this officer, he will humanize me. And then in humanizing me, that may actually break the hatred, right? We may be in an age, unfortunately, where those kind of things, it doesn't work anymore that way because we're used to the nonviolent. We see it as kind of the political script. And also we don't trust what we see in the image, right? We think it's performative and so on and so forth. And we may be immune to violence because we've seen so much violence. If that is the case, then the effort of humanization needs to go the other way, meaning that you actively humanize the person you disagree with versus put yourself in a place where their dehumanization of you ultimately leads to a reversal of you being humanized to them, right? Because of the existential reflection, where we actually now have to switch the direction, right? Well, how do you switch the direction? You need to create spaces where basically people can come in, just like you're mentioning that reporter, and tell their story, right? So basically, for example, the ICE agent sets up a table and they say, hello, woke activists. I strongly disagree with you, but I'm here basically to hear your story. Like, tell me why you're doing this. I'm here to humanize you. Likewise, the woke activist says, ICE agent, sit down. I want to understand. I think ICE is crazy. I don't know what you're doing, but I want to understand, why did you join ICE? Right? And basically, you have hundreds of these. You have hundreds of these stories. And maybe they're 3-hour podcasts, and you just do it over and over and over again to where we can hear. And then you have the immigrant. You say, hey, you came into this country illegally. Why did you do it? And you hear all the stories. And then you start hearing the stories. Like, you get this, because I think many Americans have this monolith of illegal immigrants. No. It's like redundant. There's all these different individuals with individual stories that had different individual things. And you need to hear the stories of people who tried to do it legally. You need to hear the stories of people who tried to do it the right way, or were in a situation where if they didn't leave, everyone would die. You need to hear all of those stories, hundreds and hundreds of stories, to humanize all of the different angles. And in that space of all of those narratives, it will become possible to actually think, and to actually think politically, meaningfully, and structurally, and to generate a different political will. But if we're not, this is what I'll say, if we're not going to create the infrastructure to do that, if we're not going to, as a society, to create the possibility of that sort of sharing of story to humanize the other person, then no, none of these political tensions will be addressed. They will all end in violence because we'll all be stuck in our idea of the good, and there won't be any humanization to save us from the idea of the good, to open us up to the beautiful. Because the problem today is we all have notions of right and wrong that we are trapped in. The name of the game, though, is not to get rid of right and wrong, but to sublate it into beauty. And the only way you, as Joachim will talk about, but the only way to do that is through humanization. And if you don't create the infrastructure for this shared collective humanization, then don't be surprised when it all ends in violence, and you never get a Gestalt, but a freaking aggregate. This is the prerequisite work that needs to be done. I think the social coordination mechanism can help with it. And if we don't want to do it and don't do it, don't be surprised when all of these issues only get worse, because you haven't created the infrastructure where they could go any other way. So
and another way to do it, or it's at the same time, another way is, or to facilitate all of this, is also to do something that helps you to come to realize that within you could also have been that person. Like there are impulses, yes, and there are drives, and there are things inside. There are parts of you that you've pushed away a long time ago, and lots of reasons why you don't see them and notice that they're there. Once you see that inside yourself, you come viscerally into contact with that. That lives within me too. I could very well have gone down that path, been that person. Then it's the same thing. And so the visibility of stories that humanize these people is useful, because it also might help to bring that up inside 100%. A person. But at the same time, therapy can be good for that too. Certain kinds of therapy.
Absolutely.
And other things too. But that's important too, because that's the same kind of thing. Oh, it's much harder to monsterize someone as just an evil person when you realize those same motivations and impulses live within you somewhere. That's what I'll say.
Completely.
How we do for time, Seth? You're on mute.
Oops.
There's a joke in this.
Yeah, I need to wrap up now, but I'll just chime in with one last word too. Thank you for saying that, because it's absolutely thinking of, and I have thought of the idea of just setting up public encounters. I think this should happen in city parks. So there should just be a day. We're used to advertising the protest. Why don't we just advertise the open dialogue day in the park? But to the point of, there is a certain level that feels confrontational and frightening. This is a great reason, and I will say directly, if you're the kind of person who sits and listens to the very end of conversations like this, start a YouTube channel.
Yes.
Who could you, you know, like I really hope that would make me so happy if someone listened to one of these videos and said, I'd love to talk to that friend of mine, even if they start with their friend who I'm already comfortable with, but I'd like to introduce the world to my next door neighbor who does this interesting thing or whatever it is. I think that's another part of it. And it really is just so easy. You just need Zoom and, you know, you can upload to YouTube. So,
it's so easy. Yeah.
And you know, that's, I mean, we've talked to the fact that knowing people will see it, there's a certain fear to encounter there. But, you know, if you don't want to go to the park, if you don't want to, you know, you don't necessarily have to do it in the flesh. You can just have a Wi-Fi connection and you can have these kind of encounters. And like, you know, whatever your amygdala is doing, your body is safe because you're just sitting like me in my kitchen in front of a laptop. But, you know, so I hope that more people, whether it's just in general or literally the people listening to this video, I hope will join in the social coordinating mechanism and join these conversations. So it's a pleasure to do it with the two of you. So thank you so much.
Pleasure to do it with you. Absolutely.
Guys, it's been wonderful. And thank you for making space for some of my tears. Some of them came out, most of them stayed. That Zoom, I tell you. It is really interesting what an inhibitory force it is.
Well, there's a whole conversation there that would be fascinating, maybe on a future call.
Yeah.
I will note, well, just quick, if what Seth just said cannot be overstated. If everyone, like many people, were to actually do that, like to just start a YouTube channel, tell stories, humanize one person, humanize a few people, is everyone going to see it? No, maybe 10 people see it. But if 10 people saw it and those 10 people saw it, and it really, that's culture making occurs via spread, not scale.
Yes.
Okay, that's a giant claim I just made. The culture changes via spread. You spread, and that is always the small little grassroots movement that looks like nothing exponential. Scale is a linear, culture is exponential, where it seems like nothing's happening, and then suddenly a lot is happening, right? And if everyone were to start channels, not for the sake of quote unquote content, but for the sake of humanization and to better coordinate, like if you did a YouTube channel in Bedford, Virginia, and then, oh, I live in Gladys and that person lives over there, and people start meeting and coming together and you help with travel, the flow of people moving around, a way to humanize is travel and move, but people don't know how to do it. Like you start socially coordinating in a manner that increases the flow of personhood and the process of increasing humanity, humanization. This is a very worthy and necessary undertaking. And if thousands upon thousands of people were to engage in that grassroots activity, then we would create the conditions of possibility to think the political questions and problems that we're dealing with in global pluralism. But without that work being done to create the ground, the tilling the ground, as Ross Barrett would say, then we can't think these problems. So these problems will continue to be unsolvable because they can only be addressed in the context of mutual shared humanization and a Gestalt. Because these problems, here's the reason, these problems are all ultimately coordination problems. And the only way to effectively coordinate global pluralism now is in terms of the interrelationivity of a Gestalt that is moving according to the discernment of value in people in that situation. We cannot coordinate in the effective way for global pluralism unless we create these conditions. So that's what we need to do now.
I'm just laughing, just like profound knowledge, just shh. That phrase, you said it once, Seth, that phrase just always sticks with me. Anyway.
So, you know, I can't get through my parking lot, but the snow's great.
Isn't snow a kind of psychological warfare from a drone?
Of course. It probably was a drone up there that caused the storm. It probably
the drone was the cloud.
CIA's known how to do it forever.
It's hard not to think that we're just, pretending to talk about the weather, but really we're just coming back to the subject of the girdle point yet again.
There we are.